even though those generative AI models like ChatGPT and GPT-4, even though they talk to you in natural language, it's important to remember that they are not human beings.
I'm curious if you think it would be very possible to be able to edit the type of factual knowledge or the type of information within the model once it's actually been trained there. So maybe you have curated the data set, you've made it, and you need to have it forget about a topic or something without diminishing performance on something. Have you seen any promising work or directions there recently?
What I personally think is that those LLMs, they are wonderful at being reasoning engines, which is something we didn't expect at all. I mean, at first, we thought, oh, it's going to be a big database. You can use it to, many people say you can use it to kind of interact with the web in a new way. Sure, that's part of the story, but I think the much more interesting story is that we were able to create reasoning engines, like machines, that understand human beings, that you can talk with. The fact that they can retrieve knowledge is kind of an afterthought, in my opinion. So I'm personally very focused on putting the spotlight on this reasoning engine aspect. And maybe there, you can come up with a much, much, much smaller model where you control, again, entirely the pipeline in which it was created. So you really know it's not going to spew, racist things. It's not going to, start to say anything toxic, etc. Because you have controlled everything. Now, once you have this, if you have a bare-bone reasoning engine, then you have the question of how do you interface it with an actual knowledge base, And that I don't know what is the best thing yet, This is absolutely an open question. There are many proposals for retrieval augmented, versions of LLM. I'm optimistic that one of them is gonna work eventually, and that will solve so many issues. I mean, if you do it really well, then you have the continuous update baked in, because really the LLM is just the brain, but then the knowledge is being stored elsewhere, and the brain is accessing the knowledge, as the knowledge itself is being updated.
I get this. This brings a lot of promises for, of course, the issues with what knowledge is there and knowing it, but also it helps with the freshness issue of being able to update it. You don't have to pre-train it from scratch, and relates to the idea that knowing how to access information or how to do things is often more permanent than actually exactly what the information is. As you feel like you have a good use case and you're building into it, then you can start coming up with metrics. You might go and hand label a bunch of examples and you can measure accuracy is the simplest one. And the other one that's the most, appropriate for that would be coming up with a set of examples you think it absolutely must nail these examples. And you can call these functional tests. You could consider them almost unit tests, even though it involves the model. And these often are good as a set of canary examples, sort of like the unicorn experiment in the Sparks of AGI paper, where you say, like, if I ask about this topic, it must answer something similar to this. And then you can include this in your regular integration tests or your regression tests there. I think once you start to think about scale, then you become a lot more interested in how it will perform on the tail end of behaviors. And this is what LLMs are great at. It's be able to capture a huge data distribution, but as the practitioner, it's kind of hard to guess what all those tail cases are. And so building up a larger benchmark data set and getting to people to interact with it, getting yourself to interact with it, and all that kind of stuff, I think is pretty useful there. And then once you're in the monitoring stage, you can be adding additional evaluations using similar grading methods, and then you can go ahead and get started there. I think there's a lot of open source tools also. There's Eleuther AI has a test harness that you can use. OpenAI evals are great for like a set of test cases, and so using as many of these checks as possible, I think, can give a broader perspective on it.
Yeah, I mean, this all makes a lot of sense. The only thing that I would add is, even though those generative AI models like ChatGPT and GPT-4, even though they talk to you in natural language, it's important to remember that they are not human beings. And when you talk to them, you use the same language as the one you use to talk to human beings, but actually it's understood very differently on the other end. So what I'm saying is you really have to think a little bit more about how what you say is going to be interpreted. And this, the only way I can explain it is You're trying to understand the language that the model is actually using. And what I mean by that is, for example, there can be certain keywords that the model responds to very differently. Maybe if you say that something is critical, then it really puts a lot of attention to it and it really tries to follow that instruction. Or maybe you need to say your life depends on it. Something like really, it's the way these things are going to be interpreted is hard to tell beforehand. So you need to do a lot of those tests to kind of get a vibe, a feel for how the model understands natural language, which is going to be different from a human being understanding.
Yeah, that's a great point. I think there's also some corner cases in tokenization and stuff that people can get into as well. It's not looking at words; it's looking at individual chunks that are subwords.
That's right. Sometimes you add two spaces and the answer will be completely different. So yeah, you need to do all of those tests. Do you use hashtags? Like maybe when you use hashtags, suddenly the model is in a completely different mode. So all of those,
definitely. And I think that once you find issues, knowing how to solve them can sometimes be a challenge. You might have to be experimenting with a bunch of different prompts. You might want to try a different model. You want to do post-processing of some sort. I think it really depends on how you intend on using this. But I think being able to think about it and remember that it's not a human, it's a language model, and think that there's a lot of these software quirks in it and these conditional quirks in it can help you then go and address them before you actually put it in front of people.